Good evening, and welcome to my channel. As ever, I shall be reading you a short story, which is exactly 1,000 words long, based on 5 random words, and the words that were chosen for me today are... And the story is called Going Down. Coming back from his run, Brian MacDonald saw a familiar figure on the stoop outside his Alphabet City apartment building. Manny Rodriguez was smoking, but the smell that wafted towards Brian as he exhaustedly grabbed hold of the railings wasn't tobacco. Did Manny want to get fired? "Hi there," said Brian with forced warmth. As a recent settler, he'd learned a breezy greeting was the American way. A taciturn Scot, this hadn't come easily to Brian. He'd taken some persuading that when bodega owners encouraged him to have a nice day, they meant it. How steeped in cynicism and irony his home country must seem to the average American, even in this era of fake news and presidential idiocy. Manny returned Brian's greeting with a half-hearted wave, taking a draw. He squinted into the early morning sunlight and offered it to Brian. "Don't know if Mary Jane kills the virus, but it's got to be worth a shot," Manny said wryly. Brian laughed awkwardly and declined. "Can hardly breathe as it is. 6.8 miles today." Manny nodded with the minimum of acknowledgement. "Good for you." Was that an edge of sarcasm? What was up with Manny? "Are you okay?" said Brian, stretching out his calves. Manny shook his head. "They sent me home. I'm out of a job." "What? Why?" Manny was part of the social glue that held this 15-story apartment block together. When Brian first moved to Manhattan, taking up a friend's offer to apartment sit while Jackson sailed the eastern seaboard writing another adventure travel book, Brian had thought that the notion of an elevator attendant was an embarrassing anachronism. Manny pushed the button to take you to your floor, held the doors, helped with luggage, previewed the weather, and shared his seasonal expectations for the Knicks or the Mets. He was always immaculate in the livery of the Solomon Turley apartment complex, nicknamed The Stack, and didn't expect a daily tip. Fellow residents had clarified the complex etiquette around Manny's birthday, October 9th, when a bottle of fine bourbon or a pack of Cubans would make the elevator man extremely happy. Manny sighed, stubbing out his roach. "Have a look. Fucking coronavirus." Manny never swore. This was serious. Brian wished he'd brought some cash with him, but somehow giving money to a man sitting jacketless on the stoop felt a little shabby compared with letting a uniformed lift attendant palm a 5-spot. Brian settled for a shoulder squeeze and a well-intentioned "I'll come back," although he wasn't sure he would. Was it up to Brian to cheer up a depressed Puerto Rican? As Brian entered the air-conditioned lobby, his skin began to goosebump. There was Carl, the Slovakian concierge, who job shared with Louisa, the petite, curvy Mexican on whom Brian had a crush. Carl was wearing a surgical mask. What was going on? "What's up with Manny?" Brian said, approaching the desk. He'd left his keys with Louisa, as he always did before a morning run. He was a little disappointed to see she'd finished her shift already. "And what's with the mask? You look like a Japanese commuter." Brian couldn't tell whether this possibly xenophobic joke made Carl smile or not, since he could only see the concierge's eyes. Carl's smile seldom reached that far north. "New measures. Cuomo reckons it's pretty bad. New rules on the lift too. They had to let Manny go." Shit. Brian had heard about the virus ravaging China and Italy, but there had only been a few cases in the States. Was it really so bad? Carl reached into Brian's pigeonhole. He was wearing latex gloves. Brian might have laughed, but didn't want to appear rude. He would turn on CNN as soon as he got upstairs. Emily was going to cancel their date. He could feel it. On her profile, she described herself as a total germaphobe. There was no way she was going to have a blind date with a random Scotsman with a killer virus roaming the city. Another strike to his broke bachelor status, Brian thought glumly. He glanced through the mail. Atlantic magazine, that was Jackson's. A circular from a cleaning company, A postcard from someone called Shelley in Verona. Whoever Shelley was, Brian hoped she'd checked her flight home. Italy was locking down fast. The Turley developers had skimped on lifts. There was only one per block, and although it could supposedly contain eight occupants, only if they were as skinny as gymnasts and didn't mind a spot of frottage. A note scotch-taped to the wall read, "One household at a time." Perhaps he should take the stairs. 16 flights. Forget it. Brian jabbed the 8, imagining tiny microbes crawling up his fingers and invading his skin. This was ridiculous. It was basically a bad dose of flu, wasn't it? At the 7th floor, the door slid open, revealing an elderly woman with 2 toy dogs. She backed away as if Brian was contaminated. "It's okay," Brian stammered as the door closed. I'm only going one." Inside his apartment, Brian had 2 conflicting desires. He felt grimy and cold and really wanted a shower. The heating had been off all night, the aircon accidentally left on. The large open-plan space felt like an industrial refrigerator. Brian also wanted to give something to Manny. He had a book of vouchers for Dean and DeLuca that came with a case of wine. That and $20 should do. Manny didn't look like he'd be going anywhere in a hurry. Brian decided to get warm and clean first. 7 minutes later, Brian bounced down the stairs in a hoodie and tracksuit bottoms. Surely this was the quickest he'd ever showered and changed. Nevertheless, when he got back out onto the steps, now flooded in early spring sunlight, the Puerto Rican had gone. Just the stub of Manny's joint remained, plus the grey-black smear where he'd extinguished it, a blot on the pristine grey. And there you have it, a little coronavirus tale from set several weeks ago, I guess. So if you enjoyed that, please spread the word, perhaps share it, maybe even subscribe to the channel. You can do that here. And I will see you again soon. Thanks for listening.